Mert gruplara atarsın abi.
Tamam, hazır bekliyorum.
Hello, everybody. Today we are in the 29th day of Corona lockdown, 30 days of technology in MSHOWTO event, and today we have a special guest from Canonical. The Canonical is a firm that created Ubuntu. Hayden is with us. First of all, welcome to him. Welcome, Hayden, to our event.
Thanks so much for having me back again on MSHOWTO. Really excited to come back and talk about WSL and Linux and open source and having a good discussion.
Yes, that's perfect subject and WSL a fancy tool. We all consultants and working our customers, maybe we know the WSL, and first of all, we want to describe, because as you know, we are sharing these videos after to YouTube after our stream has ended. I want to describe what WSL is, and first question is to you, what actually WSL and why Microsoft and Canonical created this one?
So to answer that question, I think we should back up and answer what Linux is. So WSL is the Windows subsystem for Linux, but let's talk about what Linux is. Linux is a free and open source operating system that was designed to be loosely compatible with Unix. Unix was the operating system back in the day that ran mainframes, workstations. It dates back to the 60s. It is a very powerful platform for development because there's a lot of compatibility, not only between Linux distributions, but with other Nix-based operating systems like BSD. So there's a large community out there around Linux in terms of the enthusiast community, servers, open source advocates, cloud development, all using Linux in some way. And Windows has had for many years some kind of way to tap that. It's either been a project like Cygwin, which was a recompilation of Linux utilities for Windows, CYGWIN, or there's even an official product that used to be called Windows Services for Unix, which was a recompilation of some Unix services for the Windows NT. WSL is the most recent version of that, which actually dates all the way back to Xenix in the mid-'80s. It is based on a compatibility layer that was originally designed to run Android apps on Windows Phone. And it came back after the Windows Phone ended as a way to run Linux applications, specifically Linux terminal applications, on Windows. And WSL 1 was a translation layer, which means it didn't have the real Linux kernel in it, but it could execute Linux binaries by translating the code, the system calls, from Linux to NT. So it gave you, WSL 1 still gives you a really great experience. WSL 2 was announced last year, and it just reached general availability this week in the May 2020 update. That's version 2004 of Windows, and it is powered by a actual Linux kernel running in a very lightweight VM utility, which still gives you the interoperability that WSL has, that we can talk a little bit more about. But what WSL allows you to do is install and run a Linux distribution on Windows. Linux is packaged in distributions. There's not one Linux. It's available from different companies and different projects, kind of with their own take on it. Ubuntu is one of the most popular, but there's other distros available for WSL, things like Debian, SUSE, and then WSL specific distros like Penguin. So they're just like you can buy or download multiple distros for your computer. You can also get multiple distros for WSL through the Microsoft Store. So why do we do all that, right? Why do we need to know what Linux was? Why did Microsoft bring this Nix development environment to Windows? Because it's exceptionally powerful, particularly for developers. And it bridges a gap between developers, particularly on Windows, who want access to those tools. And Mac OS has a terminal, a Nix terminal that gets a lot of use. And for users who want a balance of mainstream application support like Office and a Nix terminal, Windows plus WSL plus Ubuntu is quickly becoming a much more powerful stack than Mac OS. So it's just another option for users to have out there. And it's really exciting. Microsoft is investing in this platform, developing new features. They have an aggressive roadmap that includes GPU acceleration, GUI support, enterprise support, and it seems to be it's not like a one-off deal, right? Microsoft came out with number 2, and they're pushing new features. So this is definitely here to stay.
Wow, that's perfect. So, okay, as you said, this makes very powerful platform with the Windows. But the first main reason in the past is, as you know, for example, Microsoft has not native SSH tooling,
Right.
and some other maybe networking tooling, curl, etc. But most of these ones also ship to Windows 10 with Windows 10. I think it's not all about the tooling. What's the main idea behind this WSL thing?
Besides the tooling, I mean, I think it's
Yes.
about it's about the tooling and the integration.
Yes,
so
yeah.
I mean, you can now install OpenSSH on Windows, and you don't need WSL, and you can just use WSL to SSH, but it's increasing integration. So like the ability to automate Windows tasks with Bash, the ability to build applications with Visual Studio for Linux and then test, run, and debug them in WSL in Visual Studio. The remote plugin with Visual Studio Code, which allows you to basically run code in your WSL instance, and browse files and run applications in the terminal just like you were on Linux. So you're right. It's not just the tooling. It's the tooling plus the integration, I think.
Yes, it's all related about full set of development environment, I think, and some performance issues maybe related to.
Right. And I mean, the advantage of Ubuntu on WSL is that you're developing on an environment, on a terminal. And when you're done debugging and ready to push and you spin up an Azure VM, it's going to be an Ubuntu VM, right? So you're building and testing on the same environment when you're on your machine and then deploying to the cloud. So you get consistent experience. With Ubuntu, you also get, especially for our enterprise customers, Ubuntu is eligible for Ubuntu Advantage, which gives you extended security, phone and email support, and tools to manage your deployment, just like you would if you had licensed Ubuntu for Workstation. So we are starting to see pickup with WSL, not just with individual developers, but with universities and R&D labs and other tech companies who want to leverage the cross-platform nature of WSL, some of whom are moving from slower VMs and some of whom want to specifically tap the capabilities of WSL for cross-compilation.
Wow, that's perfect. So, by the way, congrats. We know Ubuntu, Canonical has a new version of Ubuntu. That's all of us waiting for a long time. It's a 20 version. And also near same time, WSL2 is arrived to Windows. In the future, this will be go something like that, or these are related things, the versioning of WSL and the Ubuntu kernels, it's related things?
So Ubuntu releases on a twice annually release cycle. So we release in April and in October. So that's our 0.04 and our 0.10 release. So this year will be 2004, and then later this year, 2010. But then every 2 years, the April release is considered an LTS, which means long-term stable, which means it will get support at a minimum for 5 years and for enterprise customers for 10 years. And that is the version that will go into GitHub Actions, into your default Azure VM. That LTS version is what we release on WSL. And then the other versions in between those, like 2010, 2104, 2110, will be considered interim releases. And those are supported for about 9 months. And that's where we kind of test new features, and you can try new things as we then lead up to an LTS, which we then support for another 10 years. So 2004 is our latest LTS release, brand new. It just came out in April. We released it for WSL the same day as it was available for bare metal, which was a first. And that will stay the same. So Canonical has not changed the development cycle in 15 years. So we're going to release in April, and then we're going to release in October. We normally don't release the interim releases for WSL, but we do make builds available for side loading. So if you do want to go try them, they are there, and you don't have to manually upgrade to them. Now, Microsoft has its own development calendar, right? They tend to release a major new version of Windows in the spring, and then a fix, kind of a set of fixes and improvements in the fall. Sometimes they hide features in the spring update that they don't actually turn on until the fall update. They're there. They're just not activated yet. So they're there for insiders. All they then have to do is pass a little update to activate it for the people in the fall. But normally they line up a little bit, but this year, because our release has the date in the title, we had to release in April, and they had to release in May. In the future, we're aligned. So, we knew WSL2 was coming. We're thoroughly tested on it. We've got we know a little bit of the roadmap. So we were ready. So the answer is no, they won't always align just because of the way the two companies work, but we'll do our best.
Okay, I think it will be lined up on the April or maybe May. Microsoft is doing all fancy events on the May and April, some build things and ignite things. Maybe we can line up on that schedule.
Maybe.
By the way, I have a question. Sorry for interrupting. First of all, thanks for joining us, Hayden. Really appreciate it. Back to question. One of the things that I thought I'd ask you tonight, out of curiosity, is how did you guys come up with this idea? Yeah, that was what I was thinking. So, who raised this demand for the first time? And who was the person behind all this big journey?
So it was a lot of people before me, basically. And it was Microsoft's idea. And Microsoft wanted a Linux terminal experience, and they could have gone out and created their own Linux distro, right? They could have. They have that capability. Amazon did, but they didn't. And I think that was the best possible decision they could have made, is they went out to established distro creators and said, let us work with us. And I think when they first called Canonical, they were a little confused about putting Ubuntu on Windows. But it was originally back in it was announced in 2016 and 2017. It was originally just called Bash on Ubuntu on Windows. It was just Ubuntu. And then in 2017, 18, they opened it up to the stores and to the other distros through the Microsoft Store. So that's when it branched out. The person who really embraced it at Canonical was the former head of desktop, Will Cook, and now Martin Wimpress, who's the head of desktop. People may know him as Wimpy on social media or from Linux podcasts or the Ubuntu podcast in particular. So it was a combination of people with vision at Microsoft and Canonical that originally shipped that first version, Bash and Ubuntu on Windows. And then even as Microsoft opened up to the other distros, Ubuntu still remains the most popular one. And we collaborate closely. Even things like WSL Conf, our first conference that was dedicated to WSL, it was Canonical and Microsoft. So we continue to drive the story quite a bit.
How was your reaction when you first heard about this?
When I first heard about WSL?
Yes.
So that's a funny story. I was actually all in on Apple. What attracts me is that the mainstream application support and the terminal, and Mac had that, right? But the hardware, I just kept getting like more and more restrictive. And like right now, I'm looking over at my ThinkPad that's docked, and I have about 14 things plugged into it right now. And if I had to plug all those in with dongles, I mean, it would just be all over my desk, right? And I like a good keyboard. And that just, I mean, Apple just didn't have a good keyboard for 5 years, right?
Yes.
They fixed it, but it's been 5 years. So I started looking around at hardware and, kind of fell in love with the ThinkPad. And desktop Linux didn't quite work for me at the time in what I was doing. So I tried Windows, and it was pretty good. It'd been like I had last used Windows in like Vista. It was bad.
Yeah.
Even Microsoft kind of admits they missed a beat on Vista. But Windows was fine. And then I fired up WSL and was like, oh, okay. So the good news is what I call the app gap, the lack of apps for desktop Linux, is getting significantly better. And part of my job, even though I work on WSL, has been to help Microsoft bring more native applications to Linux. See, to us, we don't really care whether you use Ubuntu on WSL or Ubuntu on desktop or Ubuntu on Azure. We just want you to use Ubuntu. So that is how I came to WSL. And I hear quite a lot of other people who get fed up with Mac hardware. Not to bash, I mean, Mac hardware is fun. It's fun. And Mac OS is okay. But we're about giving people options. And I think WSL is a great new option for people to get involved in open source and Linux that couldn't before for many, many reasons.
Okay, that's perfect. So you are good with Windows at the moment?
Yeah, Windows is pretty good. I mean, it's getting better. And that's the thing. Every operating system right now is in this weird transition phase, right? So Mac OS is trying to adapt to like new security models and a UI that bridges desktop and mobile. Windows has already tried that and did that back in Windows 8. It wasn't received well, so they backed off, but they still have all the stuff there that makes desktop and mobile apps work well together. But then they also have like legacy Win32 components that they're slowly pulling out and replacing with new components. Linux itself, I mean, you still fire up an old application and it's in GTK2, right? And it just looks terrible and it doesn't match your current themes. So every operating system right now is a little wonky, if you ask me. And it's just finding one that makes you happy and not necessarily one, that, has to be some sort of personal agenda. Just what works and makes you happy is what we want.
Okay.
Okay. Honor, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Hi, Hayden, by the way. First of all, unfortunately, I'm the pure Windows user. I'm really far away for macOS and the Linux. So maybe it's a the silly question, but I would like to ask: can we use this WSL on the Windows 10 and Windows Server, or can we use in the cloud, or maybe in the maybe Hyper-V on the VM? I mean, there is any limitation for using the WSL? And then maybe the second question, there's any license for using, or what about the enterprise usage?
Okay, that's a great question. So WSL ships on every SKU of Windows, including enterprise and server. You can run on server. The WSL2, which is Hyper-V based,
Nice.
traditionally Hyper-V would only be available on Pro and Enterprise.
Which means
But
we
it
can
is
use it in
available
Azure, right?
Right. But WSL2 is available on all SKUs too, even though it's Hyper-V based. So it's now in terms of usage on Azure, yes, absolutely. Also, it supports being run in nested virtualization, so you can run it in Hyper-V. And there is, as long as you have a valid Windows license, you have access to WSL. So and the distros, most of the distros are free. Some of the distros are paid to support development, but Ubuntu is free. And if you're consulting a client and they need resources to help maintain that image or a custom image, we provide those services. So we have a team, and we have the Ubuntu Advantage plan for professional enterprise grade who want to deploy WSL. We can provide support for that. So a great example of that is DICE. DICE is a game studio that's part of EA. They make the Frostbite engine, which powers FIFA. And so FIFA if you're everywhere else in the world, and Madden if you're in the US, because we have NFL, right? But also Star Wars, Galaxies 2. Basically, they wrote the back end of this in Linux, but they had to, they were Windows developers using Visual Studio C++. How did they do that? They used WSL, right? So they took their Windows workstations, their Windows devs using Windows Visual Studio, and they used WSL to make them Linux server developers. And now that runs all backend in the cloud on Linux. So that is kind of where we're starting to see the enterprise use case pick up.
Nice. Thank you.
Okay. So Hayden, can we see these fancy thing on the action?
Sure. Let me share
May
my
I ask
screen.
a question before the action?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Hi, Hayden, by the way.
Hi.
So, as you know, I am a developer, so I want to ask a question about development. And as you know, we were using Hyper-V backend for Docker desktop on Windows. And after the WSL2, we can use WSL backend, and we don't need Hyper-V. And let me give you another example. I can use Visual Studio Code, and I can debug direct on WSL, and I can run my code natively on Linux. So as a developer, I am curious about what can I do more with WSL.
Oh, that's interesting. Have you gotten into any sort of containerization or dabbled in using like Kubernetes to scale those applications out? Because that's what we're starting to see. We just did a great session with a friend of ours named Nuno on using microkates, which is a single node Kubernetes cluster on WSL. So if you're looking to go deeper past simple containerization and really start practicing how you would scale up that application, maybe you want to test it before pushing it to like Azure Arc or something like that. That is where we see a lot of things moving, is to see that kind of advanced tooling start to now make its way down from the cloud into WSL. So you can run those things there.
I think with the GPU support, it will be fast forward also gaming on Linux environments. So game developers will be benefit really very well with this support, I think.
Yeah, with GPU support coming, it's intended for AI, artificial intelligence,
Yes, also,
ML,
yeah.
machine learning type development. But the ability now for Windows developers, game developers to now potentially cross compile for Linux and debug those could significantly improve the gaming on Linux experience. So we had hoped, there's this hope that Stadia, which runs on Linux, would have improved gaming on Linux, and it might, but the tools aren't there yet. And wouldn't it be fascinating if WSL turns out to be the method, like we saw with EA's DICE, where we start to actually bring those game developers who are on Windows, I mean, whether we like it or not, they're on Windows, start to bring them over to Mac. That would be interesting.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm ready to share my screen.
Okay, just a minute. I will change, by the way, the stream screen in that.
Yeah, all the seeing the Discord, right?
Yes, I am changing this. Okay, just a minute. And we are okay now. So let me make your screen bigger on the stream. Yes, it's now clear. We are seeing. Maybe you can a little change of font size.
Yeah, it's little.
Let's see. Give me a second.
That's perfect.
Okay. So first things first, let me show you the new Windows terminal. It's here, and I know it's small. I haven't gone into the settings to change the font yet. It's customized with a settings file, and I'll have to go in and manually edit the font. But it's here. It's the new Windows terminal. It's 3D accelerated. It's super fast. You should be using it for WSL. I mean, it's just here. PowerShell, also Azure Cloud Shell is built in. But for us, because I need to show the font, I'm going to drop down into the legacy terminal real quick so I can make sure it's nice and visible. All right, so here we are. This is Ubuntu on WSL. It's just a terminal. If you were expecting a graphical login or anything like that, it's not here. You can run graphical applications, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But you pretty much, this is where you're going to start. And this is where you can start your Linux journey. If you're new to Linux, what do you do on this terminal? So, routine activities like updating your package repository works just like it does on the cloud Linux or desktop Linux. We've got upgrades available for our packages. So we're going to run sudo apt upgrade. Apt is the package manager for Ubuntu. All of your packages for your WSL environment are going to come from the distro maker. So you install from the Microsoft Store and you get a base image, but then the ongoing updates actually come directly from the distro maker. So we've got some updates here. We'll run those. While those run, I'll show you code. This is Visual Studio Code. What's the, let's see, there's a Zoom combination.
Maybe. Do you have Zoom it or something?
There's one built into Windows, and I always forget what it is.
Forget you.
Magnifier, I think. Magnifier, it was. Yes, magnifier.
Magnifier, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, correct.
There we go. Let's see. Aha, here we go. Let's see if this helps. So here we have code. This is Visual Studio Code. This is the insiders version, just because I'm a glutton for punishment. And code's a great editor. You know, it's basically with the extensions available, it's slowly becoming the equivalent of a full-fledged IDE in many ways. But there's a great extension we have here called Remote WSL. This is from Microsoft. And let's see if I can back out again. Here we go. It's installed, and I can connect to my WSL through the green button here. And click that. And I'm going to new window using distro. And I want to do Ubuntu.
What is default version for WSL? We are installing something on Windows Market. It was now 20 version. The default version of Ubuntu is 20 version in the market.
Right. So there's a couple different versions in the Microsoft Store. There's just plain Ubuntu. Plain Ubuntu is always going to be the latest version.
Okay.
Okay. And it's for people who always want to make sure they're getting the latest version. Then there's Ubuntu. Then there's the specific releases that are then maintained for 5 years, the LTS releases. So if you want to make sure you stay on those releases and don't move off, which some customers and users do, they want to always stay on 1804. They want to always stay on 2004. We make those available too. But for the most part, most users will be served by the plain Ubuntu image. All right, so I did file extension open. How do we get out of magnifier?
I think
there we go. There we go. Okay, here we go. So I opened a new window with my remote extension. You can see we're connected to WSL Ubuntu here. Let me zoom back in there. So we're WSL Ubuntu here. And the funny thing is that now when you go to File, Open Folder, it's going to open right in the WSL environment. So I've got my home folder in WSL. I've got a folder I created earlier called MSHOWTO. We're going to open it. You see the backslashes are all Linux format. Style, yep.
So these are on your local machines. It has a connection between your local.
Open this. Have a tiny application. Yep. And I have an application I wrote here, and then we can go here and see it here. There's MSHOWTO. And I wrote a little application here in NIM. And I've got it here. It just says hello world and counts to 3. And I've got it here. And we can, let's see, hello MS. All right, file, save. And then we can open the terminal here in code if we wanted to, or we can jump over here. And I'm going to build this real quick. Okay, so we've successfully built a Linux application named Hello. It's a binary, and it runs. Okay, so we can build Linux applications on WSL, and then I could send this to anyone else running any other Linux, and it would run. You know, it just works. But one of the advantages of being on WSL is that we have Windows and Linux right here next to each other. So we can cross-compile the same application for Linux and Windows at the same time. We just have to link in the proper libraries to do so. So I have a little tool here with a few extra settings on the command line to do this, but they're not super complicated. We're just redirecting NIM to build with Windows libraries, not Linux libraries. And we're going to change a few things here. Hello. All right. We're going to build it.
Wow.
And we're done. So now in our folder, you'll see we have a Linux binary, hello. And we also have a hello.exe. And we can run that from WSL. No.
It's normal. It's Windows normal.
You know what it is? You know what it is? I forgot to copy it to the Windows side. So let's copy it to the Windows side. We're going to copy cp helloworld.exe and then to my C drive, which is automatically mounted at mount C. We're going to put it, let's put it on my desktop. OneDrive, desktop. All right, so we've got it up here.
Yeah.
Let's go to my, yep. So let me zoom in to prove it's there. It's there. Okay. Now let's go to Mount C users hidden. And I'm auto completing this by hitting tab once I type the first letter. So you don't have to type the whole thing. And let's try this again. What? No. Of course I would. All right. So we're just going to drop into command prompt and do it there.
And now. Yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So normally, and I'm going to have to figure out why. Well, you could run exes just fine. It's probably not in my Windows environmental path is the problem. Now that I think about it. But you can call some of the coolest things you can do at WSL are when you reach out to PowerShell and do things in PowerShell and then bring it back into your Bash script. When you're running both sides next to each other. So this is just a cool example of using some basic code, the remote extension to cross-compile. There are so many great extensions for code for debugging live. You can use things like the great thing is you can use your classic Linux tools on Windows now. So this is here's something real quick. This is WSL Fetch. This is part of WSL Utilities, which is a package we ship in Ubuntu of just a handful of utilities that are useful for the interoperability, like making shortcuts, window shortcuts to Linux utilities. If you want to put a shortcut to a Linux utility on your desktop, which is very cool. So we're always trying to improve this experience and make it better, and are always looking for feedback on how to do that.
That's perfect. Side by side, Windows and Linux applications running together.
Can I ask another silly question?
No, go ahead. It's not silly. Go ahead.
Yeah, how you handle the folder and file structure? Because I know it's a difference in the Linux and the Windows. So when you build a Linux application in the Windows with the WSL, so is there any problem when you need something special, the Linux permission or something like that?
That can happen on certain edge cases, but generally it just works. My advice on this is that anytime you cross the Windows and Linux file barrier, you're going to introduce a bottleneck. And when you're building code, you're going back and forth regularly. So I strongly recommend people move their development, all their files, libraries, dependencies to the WSL side and build them there. Work on them, debug them, build them there. And then when you need to export artifacts, you can export it to Mount C. And this is made much easier by the integration with Explorer. In Insider Fastring, if you have WSL installed, you will actually see your distros down here listed under Linux. That's on Fastring. I don't run Fastring on my production machine. This is on Slowring. But you can still browse and get access to those files through Explorer and mount them as a network drive using //WSL $. And you can mount your distros, including Ubuntu. So we got Ubuntu, Home, Hayden, MSHOWTO. So we could then mount this as a network drive if we needed to.
Hayden,
we can see it, by the way. Yeah.
You show something, maybe a second monitor. We are not seeing at the moment.
Oh, did something drop out?
No, actually, we're seeing your one screen. Maybe you have multiple monitor.
On the screen, we are just seeing Visual Studio Code integrated, but I think you are telling something on the command line.
Let me jump out of.
Yeah, you drop your screen and then share again.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's see. Let me find magnify. There we go. Let's see, drop screen. I didn't. Okay. Screen.
In the meantime, can I ask you another question, Hayden?
Sure.
I dropped your screen. Can you share again? Okay.
Yeah, we got it.
I was just wondering if there is a any option that allows me to enable the WSL on a virtual machine in Hyper-V using nested virtualization or another technology behind it. I don't know. So is that possible to do so? If so, have you ever used that or experienced any performance issues so far with that?
So that's a great question. It is very possible to run WSL nested in even WSL2, which is Hyper-V based. So I have a blog post on my blog, Box of Cables, that actually walks through the process of trying either WSL or our Ubuntu desktop image on Hyper-V. So let me
Could you please share this link with chat window? I will post it to Twitch.
I absolutely will. Let's see. Here we go. Visual Cut. Can you still desktop?
Yes, we are seeing your folders.
Okay. Chat. Okay. Here we go. So yes, it can run in Hyper-V. Usually it just works. Sometimes if you have Hyper-V disabled, you just need to run a PowerShell command to enable nested Hyper-V on your VM on your host machine. So yeah, that's very possible. And yes, that's how I test WSL on Insider Fast is on Hyper-V. So the performance isn't that bad. Nested Hyper-V on nested Hyper-V is very usable. WSL2 is also getting nested KVM on Hyper-V, which is also very usable. The other day I booted Haiku. I got Haiku running in QEMU with KVM acceleration on WSL2 in Hyper-V. So it works. Here's what I was trying to show before, though. Let me make sure it's magnified. Keep your files on the Linux side, but then you can mount your WSL file in Linux. If you're on Insider Fast-Ring, you'll see Linux and a drop-down box over here to directly access it. Until then, you just do // $Ubuntu, and you can go to my home folder, to my personal folder, to MSHOWTO, and there's everything we were working on. And you can even mount that as a network drive if you wanted to, and then have it automatically backed up, which I strongly recommend you do. So that is how you can manage your files on WSL and avoid that bottleneck. Now, with small scripts, like sometimes I'm just writing a small automation script for my system, or I'm downloading a file using ARIA2, or sometimes I use YouTube DL to back up a video I see on YouTube. And I just do that to the Windows side. I don't worry too much about the bottleneck then. It's not very noticeable. But with those big projects, like if you're git cloning the entire Linux kernel, you should do it all on the WSL side.
So you are advising, we are already working side by side, but in the big software development projects, we have split our projects for Windows and Linux.
Well, yeah, not if you can avoid, you don't want to split them, right?
Yes.
But if you can keep your Linux files on Linux and do as much there, you're not going to hit as much roadblock of bottleneck on file IO. But sometimes you can't, so you work with it. But Visual Studio does allow there are build workflows that reach out to WSL and do things there. So it's kind of like a Raspberry Pi, right? It's like, here's this thing, and we're not going to tell you exactly how to do this thing. We have documents on different things you can do, but really this is for you to then build what you want. And then once you build a distro with everything you want, what you can do is you can back it up, right? So you can, let's go into PowerShell. Let me do a zoom in here. There we go. Okay.
That's
so we've got WSL.exe list all. Okay, so we've got I've got an Ubuntu distro WSL2, it's running. And I've got an old Bionic on version 1 that I keep around for testing. So let's say I want to back up this Ubuntu image. We can. So first thing I'm going to do is shut it down. You don't have to do this. This is just good practice in case there's anything open. And then WSL.exe. And we're going to export Ubuntu. We're going to do it to Ubuntu backup.tar.gz. And that's going to take a minute because it's a pretty big image. But you can then back up these images and then using a very similar flag with import, re-import them. So build what you want, configure your utilities, and then back it up. And then you always have an image that you can reflash if you need to with everything you have, right? All your variables, your dot files, that kind of thing.
That's perfect. So, Hayden, as you know, we are ready for WSL and open source development. And as you know, the development is not going separate with the DevOps nowadays. Everything is related to DevOps and some GitHub things, and we can integrate this environment to GitHub or maybe Azure DevOps and something like that. It's not any way to do this.
So we build the images on Azure DevOps. So we did that before at my old company, and we are building that out now. So the great thing about Azure DevOps is that you can build Windows and Linux, and it actually makes it really good for building a WSL distro, which has both Windows and Linux components. So can you use WSL in Azure DevOps? Yes. You can also use it in AppVeyor if you are doing CI/CD there. So those are the two, and GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, and AppVeyor are the three CI/CD systems. I think there's been some work on it in Travis, CI. I don't know about any of the others. The advantage to WSL2 is that because you're running the Linux kernel, you're pretty much going to get complete Linux binary compatibility. There's not going to be a obscure system call that will break an application. The issues you may run into building a WSL is the fact that you don't have like a traditional init system like systemd or upstart, which starts your processes for you manually. So if you want things to start and run automatically, you need to add them to your bash settings, right? So when it comes to building and testing WSL in the DevOps environment, not only are you going to need a Windows image that has WSL enabled and pre-installed and ideally pre-configured, but you sometimes have to work around those issues. So the good news is most things just work, and that you don't necessarily have to go to that level unless you're specifically targeting WSL. If you're building and testing for Linux, it's very likely it'll just work on WSL.
That's perfect because, for example, most of my customers try to choose self-hosted agents on Azure DevOps and want to try some Docker things on the Linux agents. And maybe with the WSL, it's very cheap and useful on the Azure, maybe to integrate self-hosted VMs for these build things.
So you can actually run Azure DevOps self-hosted runners in WSL2. I've done it. So
really?
It is possible. So, yeah. So if you do want to set up a VM in Azure with a dedicated WSL instance and install an agent on it and test your Linux applications against WSL, you absolutely can. So, oh yeah, it builds too. It's great. It was the first time it just worked. I was like, wow.
Yes, I know. That's why I'm asked. I see on your Twitter timeline that was the screenshot that you just first run it. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were testing Azure DevOps Server internally for a bit, and we were like, well, let's see if it works, and it did. It was great. So we're definitely going to be leveraging that going forward. So just it helps to keep track of potential bugs coming down the line. Every once in a while, there will be a small change in Linux that interferes with WSL. That doesn't happen much anymore. It usually affects WSL1, not WSL2. But we want to catch those even earlier than we have been. So that's why we built out Azure DevOps. That's one reason, so we wouldn't get caught by those again.
That's perfect. So with WSL2, I want to talk about this GUI thing. As we know, before we have just option for X server to run GUI applications in WSL1. But in my knowledge, when Microsoft released the WSL2 in the build event, now we have the option to run GUI. Not DirectX 12 support. It's okay. It's another discussion. But I think it's okay now to run Ubuntu UI in the WSL. Is that right?
So, not quite. The features announced at build, of those features, GPU support is coming first, and that'll be out later this summer. GUI support, we will know more about that. We'll be able to share more of that roadmap in the fall, later towards the end of the year. So that's just so we can set expectations about when those features are going to be landing. The GUI support, right now it's mostly just for running single applications. We're not loading the Ubuntu desktop. We're not loading GNOME. You can load parts of the desktop. So if you want to run like a Plasmoid from KDE, that's a launcher, to launch all your Linux GUI apps from that, you can. But it's not meant to fully replace your Windows desktop. You could hack it too if you wanted to, but I don't recommend it. But the GUI support, we'll have more details and a timeline for that this fall. It will be, so the current way you run GUI apps is you install an X server on Windows, either X410 or VCXCRV or Xming, and then you point, and I can show you this real quick if you'd like, you then point WSL at the X server on Windows. And it actually works really well, especially on WSL2. The coming GUI support, which will probably be next year, is actually a Wayland server that is running in WSL space, which Wayland is a successor to X, and it is capturing the video display and sending it to Windows over RDP, which is Remote Desktop Protocol, which is actually basically like the X of Windows, right? It speaks it natively. In fact, RDP is in the NT kernel, so it's there. It's fast. So it's taking that Wayland layer and then projecting it directly to Windows using RDP to paint it there. So that'll hopefully be more seamless than what you have to do today, where you have to go and find a third-party X and then configure it and then make sure. I prefer X410 just because it does so much for you. It's like $10 US. If not, VCXRV is a good option. You'll just need to follow some steps in the docs to make sure you configure your Windows firewall correctly. I'll share my screen again real quick and show this.
Yes, please.
Let's see.
Let me make this bigger. It's coming. Yes, we see now.
Okay. So let me open it. There we go. So this is a fresh image, so I don't think I have a GUI app installed, but let's do that real quick. So we'll do sudo. Sudo elevates our privileges to a super user. Apt is our package installer. We'll do sudo package install. Let's do gedit, the GNOME text editor. It's the notepad, right?
Yeah.
Put in our Unix password, and then it's going to get a bunch of stuff for us. It's going to get a bunch of X and GNOME dependencies, but it won't be too bad. So we'll install that. Then in the meantime, I have X410 running in the background. Let me show you that. It's right there, and it's configured on localhost.
Yes.
And then let's go see. It's installing that. And then what I've done is I have already added to my bash RC file. We'll open NAND. Oh, change to our home folder. All right, there's our home folder on WSL. I've already changed our bash RC file to add. Bash RC is a config file that runs every time you open bash. So it's useful if you're using bash as your primary shell to set settings to be configured every time you launch WSL. So I've added these two lines you see here. And what it does is it gets the IP address of your system, the IP address that's generated when WSL launches, and tweaks some libgl settings so that rendering happens on the Windows side. So this has to be set for this to work. And there's a slightly different version you use for WSL 1 versus 2, but both of these are discussed on the WSL page on the Ubuntu wiki, which I will make sure is posted. So let's see. That's still going.
That settings for X410 or these GNOME the application you downloaded?
Oh, these settings here are for any GUI apps. You need to set your display variable, and it's useful to set your libgl so that rendering happens on the Windows side. So that's there, and that's still running. It'll be done in a sec. Let's see. Run it. Let's see. Here's get out of Nano. And we'll wait for that to run. While we finish that, let's see what else we can do. One cool thing about WSL2 is that we use that Linux kernel, and we collaborate with Microsoft on that kernel. So it's currently running 4.19.84. And the funny thing is that the kernel is updated through Windows Update. So they can push Linux kernel updates through Windows Update separate from us. Now, you can also build and run your own Linux kernel if you choose, but the Microsoft kernel that we work with them on is highly optimized for WSL. And there's really, unless there's a specific feature you need, there's not a huge reason to go out and create your own kernel.
May I ask a question about this thing? This is a weird thing. How you manage this one? You are going back and forth with meetings, or it's a special dedicated team with Microsoft and Canonical? How these things going on the both side?
So, I mean, I regularly have meetings with Microsoft. You know, our teams collaborate. So we collaborate with Microsoft on Azure, on delivering Microsoft applications to the Linux desktop through the Snap Store, on WSL, I collaborate with a different team on Hyper-V. So I regularly talk to Microsoft on various projects, the .NET team, so we have overlap. And our, CloudInit is a config system for Azure, which you see when you create an Azure VM. But that's a Canonical project that Canonical created and Microsoft contributes to. So we collaborate on things like that. We're both in the technology and operating system business. So we solve the same problems a lot of times. And we're increasingly using each other's tools for that. All right. So we're all installed here with gedit. It normally doesn't take this long to install a small application. I just had to install a bunch of GNOME dependencies. If I installed another GNOME application now, it would be much, much faster because it had to install all this other stuff. But let's run it and see what happens. So gedit. Let's go find.
That's perfect.
So we've got gedit running, and
I think
you can resize. If you go to open, you can open. Here's my folder. There's my nim file. I can even go open files on my mount. Here, let me zoom in. There we go. Mount C.
that's good enough without desktop GUI support. That's perfect, I think.
Yeah. So for now, we're going to be using X support. It's just what we have. But Wayland is coming, and we're going to be working on that to improve that experience. GPU support will be first, but that'll be terminal GPU support. So that's more like, running big data,
Yes.
analysis type things. So if you're doing statistical analysis in things like Jupyter Notebook or RStudio, using CUDA, a big one is going to be TensorFlow. TensorFlow is going to be a big deal on WSL. So, and then once we take TensorFlow and put it in microcates, you're going to be able to create and debug small AI applications on WSL, and then push them to Charmed Kubernetes on Azure Arc, and it's going to work the same. It's going to all work the same because you're all running on Ubuntu, and it just goes. So WSL is very much an onboard experience to Azure, and Ubuntu gives you the support from that development all the way to deployment.
Yes, this will be very accelerate too many things, because we are on the 29th day, and I always say these technology meetings, the Kubernetes is the new platform in my mind, because all startups and ISVs locating their new application on the Kubernetes sites, and they are moving on to Azure, on the AWS, and on the GCP. These are just competing powers, not platforms in my mind. But Kubernetes is the new platform, I think, in the new era of the software development. So this makes this adoption too powerful with the Windows and the new kernel integration.
Yeah, and people know Canonical. The company behind Ubuntu is Canonical. People know us for Ubuntu. But what a lot of people don't know us is a lot of the other open source tools and software we provide. Things like Microcates, which is a single node Kubernetes cluster. Juju, which is our managed Kubernetes system. Other things we create. We've got a new image builder for Raspberry Pis that you can create and customize a custom image of Ubuntu, and then it generates it, builds it, and then you flash it straight to your Raspberry Pi. So if you wanted to build a Kubernetes cluster on your from Raspberry Pis, like the new Raspberry Pi 8 gig, you could with our builder. We've got Juju, we've got Microcates. We also have Multipass. Multipass kind of overlaps a little bit with WSL on Windows, but Multipass is also available for Linux and Mac OS. And it is an Ubuntu cross-platform image specifically for cloud application development. So where WSL gives you a lot of interoperability between Windows and Linux, and you can access files back and forth, Multipass is a self-contained, isolated way to run a fast Ubuntu terminal, and then customize it with Cloud Init like you would your Azure VM, and then test it. We also have images of Ubuntu Desktop, the full Ubuntu Desktop in Hyper-V Quick Create. So if you're curious about actually running the full Linux experience, we have it, and you can. If you have Hyper-V enabled on Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise or Education, it's there. And when you enable Hyper-V and search Quick Create, you get a choice of a Windows development desktop and an Ubuntu development desktop. So we're all about providing Linux on as many platforms as ways as possible, and then helping users and developers and enterprise manage all of that with all of the tools we use to deliver this stuff, like Juju, microcates, and that kind of thing.
That's perfect. Let me.
I have
Sorry,
a question, Onur.
just a minute.
May I? Okay.
Let me show this quick create virtual machine things. Maybe our attendees may not see this before. Just a minute, please. I'm connecting with my second account.
In the meantime, I have a super idiotic question here. I don't know, maybe it's a long shot, but has anybody heard if there is any kind of similar technology in the Linux world that allows us to use kind of dual operating system in parallel on top of Linux environment? And I mean, is there a thing like Linux subsystem for Windows or something like that? What do you think?
I think you are mute, Hayden.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Thanks. Sorry. So that's a great question. The thing is that Windows runs great in KVM, and it's easier than ever to create small Windows images, especially with Azure Image Builder, that you can build and customize. I mean, it's based on, I think it's Chef Puppet, might be Puppet. And you can create really tiny Windows images that you can then spin up in the background using KVM on Linux, and then SSHN or RDP in pretty easily. So there's not, it is kind of, there's no like Unity mode or seamless mode. Like there used to be like a way to run those Windows applications like almost like they behaved exactly like Linux applications, kind of like parallels and VMware Fusion can do on Mac OS. That used to exist for Linux, but I think it got hard to support. So like VirtualBox and VMware Fusion kind of backed off of it. And it is hard to support Linux because of the different UI toolkits and desktop environments. It's a little more challenging to support versus one on Windows and one on Mac OS. But I made a video of a proof of concept of my own work that kind of made the rounds, and it was good because I don't have the resources right now to fully develop it, but it inspired some other people to pick it up that took my idea and said, actually, we're going to do this. That's exactly what I wanted to happen, right? The best open source code is the code that you inspire other people to write.
Wow, that's perfect. This video is public?
No, mine was not public because we'll see if it has commercial application.
Okay. You are working on it.
Yeah. So right now I'm working on a book. Actually, I have a book coming out on advanced WSL. So when I finish my book, then I'll take a look at it and I'll see where the community is on the version that they kind of made for my proof of concept, and see if I can't contribute back there. So
sounds good.
That's perfect. Just a little second. Sorry, Matt. Hayden said if you want full Linux experience, you can just go to start. Of course, you have to install Hyper-V and maybe search Quick Create. As you see, Quick Create is here on my screen. When you click this one, the Ubuntu 20 is already here. Let me show you from here. And if you want to experience full Ubuntu, you can select these ones and create virtual machine, and it's spin ups very quickly. That I tried this before, so you can try these full GUI experience Ubuntu on Windows with Hyper-V.
Yep, and it has GPU acceleration, clipboard sharing enabled. Admittedly, sometimes it doesn't kick in. Sometimes it won't launch the enhanced session. We're aware of a couple bugs out there that keep that from happening, and we've got new builds coming soon. So if you have issues with the enhanced session in the 2004 image, try the 1804 image and see if that works for you. But we're working to make that better and see what we can do with that. So just a little patience if you run into bugs. We appreciate it.
That's perfect. So I am sharing your links. Okay, Matt, go on. Sorry.
Okay, as you know, there are some dangerous or little commands that can I run on Linux. For example, rf for root directory, or I can move directory to devnull, or even worse, there's a command called fork bomb that causes kernel panic. What if I run this commands against mount C or something like that? Is there any protection or isolation for Windows?
Nope, not on WSL. You're running run full trust. So if your administrator, if your user on Windows has permissions to delete those files, they will be deleted. So and that's why we also make multipass, right? So if you want isolation, we have multipass and also the Hyper-V images. So we have different options. The good news is that Windows Defender, which is now just Microsoft Defender, is checking what's happening in WSL. So if you accidentally download like a compromised node package that has a crypto miner in it, Defender will pick that up and block it. So it will stop malware from entering through WSL, especially if you like curl pipe to a bash, where you're just running some random person's shell script that could download anything. Microsoft Defender supports Linux and is running there to protect you. So in terms of lockdown, we hear from some of our enterprise customers that that's something they want to do, and that's something we can do like a custom spin for when they contact Canonical. We have ways of doing that. So there will be more tools on how to, and documentation on how to support WSL in Enterprise in the coming months. So hopefully we'll have something really neat to show off at Ignite, I think.
Matt, we are all Windows guy, and you don't know the open source world. Please take away yourself from these weird things, okay? You don't, you cannot manage these things. We have to learn first. Okay, thank you very much. So, guys, another question to Hayden.
No, not from me.
Okay, Hayden, first of all, thank you very much for your time and for your efforts for this session. We are very happy for this session. It's very beneficial session, and we learn a lot of things for the first month from you. And thank you very much. I hope we will do these things more regular, maybe in the future. Thank you very much again. And if you want to say something, the voice is for now, and I will conclude my session after that.
Well, thanks for having me, and thankfully in the future we can do this in person sometime. I'm really excited about WSL and the new features that are coming, and I want to just take a quick opportunity to talk about like open source and what this means. We have these great tools now on on WSL. And a lot of Windows developers are going to get a lot of benefit from those. But it's important that we contribute back as well, that we become reputable partners in the open source ecosystem on WSL. There's going to be things that don't run on WSL, and you can file bugs, but sometimes you may need to help that upstream project. You might need to patch it, right? So if you're new to open source and WSL is kind of your introduction to open source, please take some time and learn how to write a good bug report. That can be so helpful to upstream project maintainers. Being able to make good logs, figure out a way to write steps to reproduce so that someone coming new to the problem can create the problem. Create PRs, pull requests for improvements, participate in the community, get involved in organizations like the GNOME Foundation or the KDE community, and engage. And I think when WSL community is already doing that, right? It's happening. But what I really hope comes out of this is that Windows users, with WSL devs, really become contributors and players in the open source ecosystem. But in order to do that, we have to learn how to do those bug reports and the PRs, and how to participate in consensus open source projects. And then so not only do I want to introduce people to WSL and Linux, but I want to introduce people to the idea of the collaboration.
Yes,
on software.
that's perfect. Do you have any suggestion as something like that guide on GitHub or maybe article?
There's a whole section on the Ubuntu wiki on how to report bugs. Now you don't have to, shouldn't use that. Don't necessarily use exactly that. But if you're looking at a project and let's say you encounter a bug and you find the project on GitHub, you're going to want to check the contributing, see if there's a contributing page. What do they anticipate in terms of contributions? Check existing issues. Search issues for your problem. See if it's already been addressed. See if there's workarounds. See if it's been flagged as a feature that's coming, and opening a new issue isn't going to help. It's just going to slow the maintainer down. So look at the project, look at the contributing guidelines, search existing issues, see if there's a template for issues. If there's a template for submitting issues, complete it. Logs, screenshots are so helpful. And what I worry is that some people are going to get WSL and then it's going to be great, and they're going to run into an edge case that doesn't work on WSL. And there's a few of those still left, right? And then they're going to go submit a bad bug report to a project, and the maintainer's just going to close it because they don't know about WSL. They don't really care about WSL, and it's a bad bug report anyway. They can't do anything with it. But if it's a good bug report and it's got tails and it explains where the problem is and why it doesn't work on WSL, and that upstream maintainer can actually work with it, or better yet, you can even submit a PR to fix it for WSL. That is the level of engagement that I'm trying to get us to as a community. And some people on Linux are very well versed in this, and some people who are coming from the Windows ecosystem are learning now for the first time. And that's good because we want to bring more people in. But I'm telling you, good bug reports make such a difference.
Yes, that's perfect advice. Thank you very much. I've shared the WSL GitHub repository, GNOME GitHub repository, and wiki ubuntu.com, and some advice from first contributions repository from the GitHub for our audience and for record these ones to this session. That was perfect because this is the new world that we are working. For example, I was on the session last night with Microsoft and telling GitOps to someone, and the main idea is doing everything with pull requests, because this is how we socialize on code and technology. This is very important. This makes us and technology very good and improve us. So this is very important. Thank you very much for your advice. It's a very important topic.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And it's good to be on MSHOWTO again. And like I said, I look forward to being back and maybe making it in person sometime.
That's perfect. We will. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Cheers.
Bye bye.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Cheers.
Bye.